haven't come together and shown that you care about people rather than just care about the bottom line and care about shareholder value, then you're going to get called out.
Hi Wayne.
How are you? Good? Yeah?
Yeah, good. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I think nowadays it's quite difficult when people see the overall arching thing of people's career to realise like how far they've come. And with you've definitely come a long way. Your career started, am I right, on Camden Market?
Yeah, so it was back in 1979. I moved from Blackburn to London, and first thing I did is set up a band, like you should do when you're that age. And anybody that's been in a band will know that it costs money. It's at rehearsal studios, buying equipment. And we moved down with 50 quid each in our pocket, me and my future wife, and it was kept in a tin on the mantelpiece. And the rent was due on the Monday, and I foolishly, well, probably not really in hindsight, but as a young lad would do, dipped into that money to buy a saxophone, which I never learnt to play at all, of any note. Excuse the pun, and to pay for some rehearsal studios. And the rest of the band was supposed to pay me back for the rehearsal studio rental, but they were all on the dole, and they all hadn't turned up at job interviews, and so they couldn't pay me back. So we were stuck with either we were going to be kicked out of our rented flat in northwest London, or we had to get some money together to pay the rent. And we emptied our wardrobe onto Camden Market. My future wife had seen, Geraldine had seen that there was in Time Out magazine that for £6 rent you could rent a stall. So we that's what we did, and we took 300 odd quid that weekend, and that was before then. We'd never have imagined that we would be designers, entrepreneurs, all the things that we are, I suppose. And it was just that, I think you always get some things that happen in your life that you never expected. And we must have been just in the right state of mind and position and age and everything and just at the right stage of life to be able to make the most of it.
And what does the second trip to the market look like?
It was very different. The next we went there on a Saturday, and we took 100 odd quid that day, which means that we'd got more money. We'd had more money in our pockets than we'd ended up in leaving home with and going to London with. So that we then thought, blooming heck, let's get there tomorrow morning. But we'd been jealous all day because we'd been at the back of the market. Think of the old Buck Street Market next to the Electric Ballroom in Camden. We were towards the back of that, and we were seeing people at the front and thinking, I wish we were at the front, getting all those thousands of people walking past. We'd have sold even more. So we got there at 4 a.m. We got the night bus, the N18 down the Harrow Road, laden up with these bags, these Chinese laundry bags, then 50p laundry bags you get 2 for £1 in Poundland, and loaded up with a combination of my old punk clothes. I'd always worn second-hand clothes, and Geraldine had always made her own clothes. So we got there to queue up to get the front stall. We got the front stall. We took double the amount of money by getting the front stall, and that we'd learnt our first big thing of retail. Position is everything and location is everything. So you learn. It was amazing. We were learning literally on the job straight away, and from then on we just made sure that we were the first there. To this day, I get up at 4 o'clock, between 4 and 4:30 every day, because that's what we had to do to get the first stall on the market.
I think something very interesting you said earlier is that you hadn't had any sort of like entrepreneurial, because I believe that there's this myth that people say like, oh, you're either born an entrepreneur or not. And I really disagree with that, because I think anyone at any age can start something, and the lessons that will teach them along the way can lead them to the path of entrepreneurship. Yeah,
I agree as well. And you don't know where entrepreneurship comes from. I mean, we were obviously, who'd have thought? I grew up from the age of 13 going to nightclubs. I was, that's my mum, single parent family, and my mum she was always a nightclubber and just encouraged me to go out and dance. And so it didn't stand in my way of doing that. But I always I was from a household from my nan and my mum as well, who always made their own clothes. So I was always able to buy second-hand clothes and do a bit with them. When punk came along, instead of going to, well, not that I would have ever been able to afford to go down to London and go to World's End and Vivienne Westwood, but making your own bondage trousers from second-hand clothes and all of that. But I never knew that that what I learned from that could be the start of my career. And the same for Geraldine. She from a poor family, but a family that made clothes, and she would make clothes for, she's one of five girls, and she would make clothes for her sisters. And again, that skill and the fact of being able to recognize secondhand clothes. Because if you think, go back to 1980 and 1981, the wearing secondhand clothes was you were very unusual. It was a bit of a weird thing to do, and it was a very small amount of people who were doing it and being able to do it and look cool. And yet I'd been doing it from the age of 13, partly out of necessity, partly out of the family that I came from. And I had these skills that suddenly were... The wearing of secondhand clothes absolutely exploded on a scale. Now people think, oh, everybody wears secondhand clothes. Everybody knows how to shop at Depop or eBay or go to a vintage market or go to a vintage sale, all of that lot. But back then, the word vintage didn't exist apart from vintage cars and vintage wine. There was no such thing as vintage clothes. You wore secondhand clothes. But just by circumstance, I'd 7 years of experience of wearing it, and I was probably I had an understanding of it, and then when you have people like your nan, when my nan started to say, well, take my 50s dresses to sell on the market, and my mum saying, take my 60s dresses, and then when my nan's asking the rag and bone man, I better explain do you two young men know what a rag and bone man is?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I do, yeah.
Do I need to explain what a rag and bone man is?
Just in case, let's go for it, yeah.
So when my nan starts tapping up the rag and bone man, who is a man that walks down the street where her house was in Morecambe with a horse and a cart, shouting, rag bone, and he's asking for, bring out your rags, which are your clothes, and bring out your bones, which is your bone china, and bring out basically the stuff that you don't need anymore, and he would take it and sell it elsewhere. So she asked him, where do you take your rags? And we found out about these things called rag yards, or shoddy and mungo yards they were called, which is where the word shoddy clothing comes from. And he said, I take them to Dewsbury, where I weigh them in, weigh all these clothes in, and where they get recycled. So he told us where they were. Off we went, me and Geraldine, to these basically recycling yards, which they were called mungo and shoddy yards, and where we would be the only people there buying up what would eventually be called vintage clothes. We were buying 1930s dresses, brilliant 50s suits, all sorts of stuff. And we were the only ones. And we were learning about social justice, because the people working in these basically old factories were really, really poor. They were living from hand to mouth, but we were doubling their wages by saying, if you keep one of those 50s printed dresses aside, we'd leave them examples. If you keep one of those 50s printed dresses aside for us, we'll give you £1 or £2. And suddenly we were like heroes there. And we were filling 2 big Luton transit vans a week of stuff and bringing them back down to London. We would take them all straight to a dry cleaner, who would then sort them out into what needed pressing and what was so filthy it needed cleaning, and then they go straight back in the van to Camden. And we got to the point really, really quickly where we were taking. It was always a race between me and Geraldine. Who was the first one to get to £5,000 in take? Imagine that, we were taking 10 grand a weekend on Camden Market.
Oh,
in 1981.
Yeah, by 1981 we were certainly up to that kind of money. Yeah.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. And then parallel to that, Geraldine, some people who listen to this may have heard of Kensington Market, which was an indoor market on Kensington High Street. Geraldine took a stall in there, took her sewing machine in, made her first collection of clothing. We didn't call it Red or Dead in the first days. She didn't have any labels in it. Got an order from Macy's New York. The story behind that I won't tell on this, but it's an amazing story in its own right, and how from there we ended up, my mum packing in her job, working in a pub as a barmaid in Blackburn and opening a factory with us funding it from the money from Camden to buy a load of machines from Exchange and Mart, which was like the equivalent of what eBay is today. And employing a load of women from Blackburn, and starting this factory up and coming up with a label on the hoof called Red or Dead, coming up with that, and supplying Macy's New York with an order for like 1,600 pieces and we just did it all with no training. We never borrowed any money. We never had an accountant or a business plan, and it was all done from young people that we'd met in clubs and on Camden Market. And my mum and her mates in Blackburn.
I think what's really interesting there is the fact that when David kind of talks about how no one's born an entrepreneur, I think what does make an entrepreneur is someone who can spot what works and analyze what works and then really excel at that. For the fact that your first day on the market, you were like, okay, well, this isn't the best spot to be. I need to be there. And within the second day, you'd already got up, made that sacrifice to lose a bit of sleep that night to get to that location to sell more. And it's almost like everything you've done, you've just kind of looked at what's happening and looked at the market and said, this is working.
Most of it is common sense. I think the best thing that anybody can have is common sense. And that probably is just having a clear mind that thinks about things. And that's what we've always done. I mean, I think there's a real advantage sometimes of having no fear. We had nothing to lose. We were from backgrounds where it wasn't expected for us to do this. There was no pressure. I was the first to own a car. In our family that we were the first to leave home to go to London and all of that kind of stuff. And there was just no pressure on us. And I think that really, really helps. And also it's that thing of when you're young and it just felt like anything was possible, but it didn't feel, it just felt natural in the same way as we had kids very, very young. And maybe it was a northerner in us, we'd had about 3 kids before we were 30. We certainly had 3 kids before we were 30, and we were doing and yet running the business and doing all of this, and it just felt like life.
Do you think people put too much pressure on themselves today?
Yeah, I do. And we have never, I think that's partly because when you come from nothing, the fear of failure is probably not a lot, because your peers, everybody, you've got no peer pressure from people. I should imagine it's quite difficult if you go to a posh school and everybody's, some people are going into the city and some people are going to become lawyers, and you want to try something like we tried. There might be a bit of fear, because you might fear that actually, should I have gone down that route and gone and been a junior manager at Marks and Spencer's, or all of that kind of stuff. But because of our back, nothing was expected of us. Nobody in our family had achieved anything other than just to hold down, jobs to bring a wage home. I think that helped us an awful lot, and it felt like this adventure where your family were really behind you, because it was like, oh, Wayne's gone to London and he's going to be a millionaire, and Geraldine's gone to London and she's going to be a famous fashion designer, and your parents, are all so, and your families are all so excited about it. And I think that family support from the excitement around that somebody within the family was breaking out of what the norm was a fantastic support, just a fantastic sense of just pride for us as well.
You mentioned that a lot of it was common sense, but I think also a lot of it is going against the grain. And obviously you have like lots of inspiration from music and punk music specifically. Like, how important has kind of rebellion and doing the opposite to the way everyone else was going? How important has that been?
Well, as you get older, you start to analyse this. And we were actually talking about this weekend because I watched a film called The Nightingale, which was a really hard-hitting story about brutal British colonisation of Australia. And when I was young, because I'm half, First Nation, but not everybody will understand what First Nation means. So in old money, American American Indian. So because I'm half, in very old money, Native American Indian, but you can't really say the word native anymore. But I suppose I can because I am one. So because of that, I grew up always, watching cowboys, and my generation, the film of choice was to watch a cowboy and Indian film, and Saturday morning cinema was all about that. And I used to get very upset about the Indians, losing, and was all, which they always seem to do in every film, but I was always up for the Indians. And I think also because of the political leanings of both our families, we were always up for the underdog. And I think that has helped us, number one, in what we stand for, because we've always, Red or Dead, our first business, really did stand for something. We all the way through, we were political, simple things like manufacturing in prisons, when we knew that, you talk about going against the grain. We've never been frightened to go against the grain. And I think punk came at the right age for me. It came at 76. I was 15 when it hit, and it didn't just hit London. It hit the north pretty quickly, and it felt like, I remember, I was still at school then. I hadn't done my O levels, my GCSEs when punk hit, and I remember, there was two of us within the school that went for punk in a big way. So it was like cutting your tie down the middle, making it thinner, your trousers, making them really narrow at the bottom, and wearing brothel creepers, big 1950s crepe shoes to school, and just getting in trouble, but then finding to subvert the school uniform in another way. It was constant, and you realized that you form bands, your friends form bands. You don't need it. It was genuinely a time where it felt like you could just have a go, and it didn't matter how rough you sounded, how rubbish you were, but it was a time of, and you did your hand drawn flyers for your band.
It was the birth of DIY culture, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think there was some DIY culture in psychedelic and hippie times when you look back at the posters from that. But this felt like, even though I think in London it wasn't quite as, it didn't totally come from a working class feel. In Blackburn it did. It felt like there was something here for working class people who had a bit of gumption about them to really get hold of. In a similar way, but I'd also been lucky enough to grow up through Northern Soul, and that wasn't that dissimilar, in not in terms of its aggression, it was protest music that we danced to. We danced to black protest music, and fashion, and a DIY fashion was a big part of that. So again, I was lucky for that to happen at an age between 13 and 16, which are really formative years, and then you've got your family as well, who are political and wanting change. The ingredients were there.
I think what's really interesting about punk as well is the fact that it's not perfect. It's kind of raw, and it's kind of, there's not this level, this huge bar you have to hit for it to be amazing. Like, to make a poster, you can hand draw it. It doesn't have to be perfectly formed letters. Like, the music doesn't have to be sang. You don't have to hit every single note. Everything is a bit more raw. So I suppose the barrier to entry there, you don't feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. It's just, there's such this high level of perfection. You can just be yourself. You can just throw yourself into it.
Yeah, and we've done that all the way through. When you think that, we went on, Red or Dead became an international label, and we'd got no training in fashion, and nobody in the company, nobody came from a fashion background. We had 300 odd staff in the end, and there might have been the odd pattern cutter through the years who'd learned how to pattern cut, but in general, this was a group of young, clubby people who knew what people wanted to wear, and we'd find a way of doing it, and we'd find a way of supplying Japan and open. We had shops in Japan, Toronto, and none of us could speak the language. None of us knew about export, but we found ways because we wanted to. And it's very similar to when we started to design housing. in the year 2000, and neither myself and Geraldine would ever call ourselves architects, and we got criticised. And when we ended up doing one of Britain's largest housing developments and it started to win awards, there was some real snidey stuff heading our way. There was loads of snidey stuff in the fashion industry, actually, even though Vivienne Westwood didn't go to art college before she started World's End. Paul Smith wanted to be a professional cyclist and didn't study design. There was a real sniffiness about, and there can be a real snarkiness about it. And the same was when we started to do housing. They were saying, well, they're not architects. How can and we'd just say to them, well, actually, we've lived in houses. By the time we started to do housing, I was 39 years old, and I said, well, I've lived in housing for 39 years. If I don't know what they're supposed to be like by then when am I going to learn? And you bring in with that, we had to bring in the structural engineers and the architects to make sure that the house stood up, but we still knew what a housing estate should be like, as opposed to the shit that some architects were delivering. We felt we could do better.
Yeah, so it's understanding the customer, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's understanding us. We've always, what we've never done is step out of, and this has probably been probably the most sensible thing we've done. We've never stepped out of our background and our family, in terms of, if we've designed houses, it's not for some, we're not designing for a client like Roman Abramovich or some celebrity or a footballer or something like that. We're designing the homes that we design are designed for, sister-in-law, sister, brother, cousin. They're for us. They're for where we're from, and it's been our clothing, wasn't. Yes, it was worn by really famous people, but it was aimed at the people we went clubbing with. Nobody else. Yeah. Nobody else. We never thought of anything else other than, will our clubbing mates wear this?
It's quite a good bar to have. Yeah, just like always asking that question. I suppose it keeps you true to your sort of core principles. Is like, would XYZ person, would they wear this? And then that's just, if you ask yourself that for each outfit.
Well, it also makes it way easier because, we'd spent decades and decades living with these people, growing up with these people, going out with these people, going on holiday with these people. If you're designing for people, it's bound to be easier, and we've talked about that, but also because I think we have remained pretty grounded, and in so many ways we've not, we have got money, of course we've got money, but we don't live the rich life, and we don't go around, like Philip Green or something like that, so it makes total sense. It makes it easier to be that way because your market, but it also helps with it also helps. If you're true to yourself, it helps to be able, you can market yourself better that way as well. Mm. I don't have to think twice in an interview about, should I say this or should I say, I just have to say what, because I'm just doing what we do. I'm just talking about what we do and what we are like.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially when it comes to interviews. It's like if you've got a podcast or whatever, if you make content for the internet nowadays, you can't mask who you are because eventually it will slip. Because during hundreds of hours of conversations, if me and Adam were pretending to be someone else, you would have found out by now, because it's just not possible to keep up that facade. And it's funny how prevalent that is in today's internet culture of people putting out these pretend personas that actually aren't real. And because you can kind of spot it a mile away. It's quite transparent when you do spot one.
Yeah. I agree, and you spot it all the time, and we've been through it all our lives, none more so than in the fashion industry. It was full of it.
You mentioned the decision to work with prisons. What did you actually do with prisons for Red or Dead?
We wanted to do our first workwear stroke denim range, and we'd no experience, like I said, in design. So we researched it, and we researched that, kind of workwear and denim really came out of the American prison system. And it was initially, made by prisoners for prisoners when they were out on the chain gang breaking rocks. And then we read about this, that they still made workwear in prisons in America, but there was a real split between the kind of democratic thinking and Republican thinking about whether you should just lock people up and throw away the key and give nobody the chance to do anything, or the kind of more liberal view that if you give somebody something to think about and a purpose in life, they're less likely to go off the rails. So we agreed with that, and so we thought, well, wonder if we could make our first collection in a UK prison. Anyway, we found the only prison that was capable of it was Full Sutton Prison in York, and so we went there. We did all the sampling, and then there was some publicity around it. We're always been good at marketing in that respect, so we started to talk about it. Long before there was anything on, long before the internet. So we started to talk about it and get it out there. And this fabric supplier came to us and said, we've got this new fabric and we think it'll be perfect for your workwear range. And it's made from hemp. And we got talking and we thought, this is brilliant, because the history of workwear was also wrapped up in people like, James Dean and counterculture and all of that. And hemp, obviously, linked to cannabis, even though it's a completely different, that you can't smoke fabric on a roll. It'd be a bloody big spliff, that, wouldn't it? Like 60 inches wide and that thick. But anyway, so we thought, this is great. This is another bit of, we're making clothing out of hemp. It's being made in a prison. There's really good marketing going to be from this. Anyway, it got out, Daily Mail and others, that we were sneaking cannabis on a roll into a prison. We were worried sick. They were doorstepping us, and I thought, have we really messed up here? And anyway, we got the science. We had to get it all tested. It had already been tested anyway by the fabric supplier, of course. We got it all tested, and it was completely spurious. It was two separate complete processes, and you couldn't smoke. You couldn't smoke this fabric. So we were able to go to the Guardian, who wrote a really good piece about it, and they love to have an attack on the Daily Mail, as you know. Our sales just went boom like that, because it was like us doing the right thing for our customers, and being thinking about society and thinking about purpose. We didn't use those words. We didn't use the word purpose back then. Being purposeful, as you would say today, but also being cheeky and giving ourselves something to really market to. And we did that all the way through Red or Dead. Things like that. It was that combination of cheeky, socially aware, purposeful, and doing things that we knew certain parts of the media and the public wouldn't like, because you can't be all things to all people. We know that we can't. The taste is so wide that that's another thing that's really important, I think, is realizing that you can't please everybody. And we know that, and are not afraid. We're not afraid to upset, as long as it's not illegal or harming anybody. If it's somebody's views and we don't agree with them politically, we'll go right against them.
Yeah, I was DMing with someone yesterday. They reached out to our Instagram account and was asking some advice, and they've started a streetwear brand. And one of the things he said in the DM was, I really think that this brand could appeal to everyone. And that was kind of the first thing that I went back with, is like, yeah, if you try and please everyone, then you'll please no one, and you need to pick your sole client and market towards them, rather than trying to hit this wide. I'm
just trying to think, is there a brand that pleases everybody? Baked beans, Heinz baked beans. There will be something out there, won't there?
Yeah, so it's anything that's kind of seen as like a household name, I suppose, that like Fairy Liquid, for example. I imagine
that won't, because it's not as sustainable as Ecova, is it?
Yeah, there's always going to, it's between nothing that pleases everyone. Water.
It's not a brand though, is it?
No.
It's a good thing that you'll have to put it out there there must be something, some product, some brand.
But I feel like that's the way society works, is as soon as most people like one thing, like pop music, for example, most people like pop music, but there'll always be people who don't want to be the same as everyone else. So they'll go and create something or form something that is different so they can feel unique, so they can feel different. Like it happens with music all the time. And I feel like even with someone like Apple, there's always like, if you go on like a YouTube comment thing of like any Apple products, there's like an Android Apple battle constantly, like, oh, PC's better, or this Apple thing's better. Oh no, that's a waste of money. There's always people who like to feel unique and have a voice. So I think no matter how good a product could be, like if you look at the fact that people in America are kind of campaigning about not wearing face masks, and it's like, that's something that's scientifically proven to reduce people dying. But people are just like, no, I'm not going to be told what to do. I'm just going to go for it and just do whatever I want.
Yeah, you can't be all things to all people, can you? Unless you're a baked bean.
Yeah.
Over the past few weeks, we've had some communication back and forth with your team of brilliant people. How at Hemingway Design do you kind of align your team around the goals of the company?
Well, there are a lot of good people out there, and there are a lot of young people who are who want to do the right thing with their careers and make a difference. And so we don't really struggle to find people. And obviously when you're vocal and you do media and you're in the public eye to an extent, then people know about you and they graduate towards you. So, but the thing that we never do is never look at anybody's qualifications, and we always look at that what they are as a person. And there are a lot of good people out there. I mean, I wish, it's that kind of balance between becoming. Sometimes I wish we could just become so big that we could employ hundreds and hundreds of amazing people. But then you end up with Red or Dead, we became so big that we lost that human touch to an extent, and we were ready to sell it because it had lost that family. And when I say family, I don't mean the word Hemingway. I mean the family of people doing something together, going out clubbing together, feeling. So it's a difficult one. That we're like Hemingway Design now. We are, we could expand pretty radically, but well, I wouldn't be doing it. It would be the younger generations of people coming through. But we are genuinely fearful of becoming then a design agency that loses its soul.
So how do you keep that?
Well, you keep it by good leadership and by a whole team who want it, and also by making sure that you choose the projects that are not taking you off in a direction that people question internally. Are we doing the thing here that we really want to do?
Yeah.
So you really do it by turning a lot of work down, I would say, which we do, we genuinely do.
And how do you have that kind of mindset of like, well, if I turn this down now, what if something else doesn't come through?
Well, we are genuinely lucky in that respect, in that because we've never borrowed any money and because our office is in a building that we own, we can take the kind of risks that not everybody can take. And that's, partly because the business has been, well, it's 40 years. It's a long time now, and you see, we've got embedded reserves, as they call it in business, which is rare.
So I know that you've said that like purpose and value should always be at the core of any business, but how do you balance that with actually making money?
Well, that's all, that is the $1 million question when we're talking about money. But I do believe that it's becoming easier. I think it's been. So I've got friends who have been purpose and values led all their life. A good friend called Safi Amini has set up People Tree, which was one of the first ethically fashion company that was completely ethical in all its sourcing and all its thinking, and it's been a struggle, and it's been a struggle for her and the whole business, because 20 years ago, I reckon it's about 20 years ago, the world probably wasn't ready on a scale with enough people who cared about the provenance of where things come from. But 20 years on, the world is a very different place. And remember the word for my generation, the word sustainability and the idea of global warming it wasn't there. It wasn't something you ever talked about. But now, and we've got another generation. Just think of what the Greta generation. Just think about how old is she now? 17, whatever, 18. I don't know. But just think about that very young generation who've grown up. I'd be surprised if, from whatever background you're from, if you don't know who Greta Thunberg is and you're of her age. There'll be as many people know her at her age as know who Boris Johnson is or Donald Trump is.
Yeah.
And they're going to grow up following her, listening to her. She's not going to change. She's not going to change her tone. She's not going to suddenly become 21 and forget about what she stands for. I hope not, and I doubt it very, very much.
Start throwing trash in the streets and spraying aerosol cans off of her.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen, is it? But that is I had no heroes like that. The first one that I had was Anita Roddick from Body Shop, and by then I was how old would I have been then? I'd have been, by the time she was setting famous, I'd have been late 20s, going on for 30. But today's young kids are growing up with heroes who are purpose-led and thinking about society and thinking about the environment. This is enormous. This is massive. If we don't change things, if the world doesn't start changing for the better now, if you can't be a purposeful business now and make a go of it, whenever you're going to do it. So I think, and I actually don't think now you cannot have it's very hard to think that somebody could come along and set up the new version of Topshop, and for it not to have some form, or the new version of Primark or whatever. So even on that scale, on the mass market scale, and for it not to think about where it was manufacturing, how it was treating its workforce. Boohoo got called out very, very recently, and rightly so, and their share price dropped by, what was it, a third or something, and didn't recover. I don't think it's recovered to this day. And they will, I'm sure they will change. They might have been on a journey anyway, but they weren't all over that journey if they were.
Yeah.
But now you're going to get, you talked about being called out earlier. You're going to get spotted if you're not authentic. Well, that goes for businesses as well. You are not going to get away by manufacturing in a factory in Leicester and paying somebody £3.10 an hour. You are not going to get away from working in a factory in Bangladesh and that factory being the worst conditions. Somebody is going to catch you out nowadays.
Yeah, I think the world is so transparent now because of the internet, and media is just all over the place all the time. And I think the only way that Topshop and places like that will keep going is by having to change, because otherwise someone will come along who does the same products in a sustainable manner, and people will just start shopping there, because that's the way so many people's mindsets are changing now. So for the big companies out there, if they don't change quickly, someone is going to come and overtake them, because you see how fast Boohoo grew. It hasn't taken that long for it to become one of the biggest brands in fashion brands in the UK, and that could definitely happen again with a more sustainable version of that. And
it is only a matter of time before technology. At the moment, we've got one of the issues about that stops sustainable fast fashion is the fact that we haven't found a way for human beings to earn enough to compete with fast fashion that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
But somebody will do something that's combining human endeavour with technology. It is only a matter of time, as you say, and I don't think that time is a long way off. But then, we say that, and I bought the first Prius to come in the country in 2000, Toyota Prius 2003 to come in the country. 17 years later, we're still driving it, 280,000 miles. Which I'm really proud of, that car. But then we all the time we've been thinking, but we've got to buy an electric car because that's hybrid. We're still using petrol.
Yeah.
So we went out. We waited till we thought the perfect one came out. This thing called a Honda E. Got it delivered 2 weeks ago. Been driving for the first time a wholly electric car, and oh my God, are we not ready as a country? So it shows how things, charging points broken everywhere. Going to towns trying to drive to a town where you can't even charge your car up because there aren't any that you can use.
Yeah.
And so we say things moving quickly, but 17 years from a hybrid electric car to still not being able to properly use one, we better bloody start moving quicker.
Yeah, so that segues us perfectly actually into the Good Business Festival. We're going to be doing some work with you guys on the Good Business Festival, but could you describe what the purpose of the festival is?
Well, the Good Business Festival is, what it says on the tin. It's about profit comes from purpose, and it's about purposeful business, and it's about what business can give back to society, and that now is not a niche subject matter. This is everybody is on that journey, and the whole thing is this is the first world festival that wherever you are on the journey, whether you're just starting on it, whether you're a small business wanting to find out about it, or whether you're a giant like Patagonia who kind of has nailed it to like nobody else seems to have nailed it in the fashion industry, and so we're even talking to, we want BP to be part of it, whereas lots of these events before would have said, we're not touching them with a barge pole, because we know that every business is going to be on that journey now. And we want to become the world's gathering for it. So the Davos, the South by Southwest of business. And we've been funded, it's a not-for-profit, and it's been funded by central government as part, and then the money's been given to the combined authority Liverpool City region as part of the levelling up agenda to create a world event in what is an amazing, Liverpool is just an amazing place, in an amazing regional British city. And it's coming along swimmingly. It's just, COVID has helped because it's focused everybody on the importance of purpose in business, and people have really been called out where they haven't been purposeful, whether it's been football clubs, whether it's been businesses, whatever, whether it's been banks. If you haven't come together and shown that you care about people rather than just care about the bottom line and care about shareholder value, then you're going to get called out. And it's just we're really, I think for me it's felt like the early days of Red or Dead and the early days of Hemingway Design, when we were doing our first housing, that we knew we were onto something. We didn't know where it was going to take us, how far it was going to take us, and this is a team that's half public sector, so half the team work for Liverpool Council as part of their culture team, and half works for Hemingway Design, and together, and I love that idea that there's a purpose-led private sector with the public sector, which by its very nature is purpose-led, that we've come together, and the team is so strong, so together, and it just, it reminds me, I'm a big football fan, Blackburn Rovers are my main team, but I do actually love what Liverpool are achieving, and it reminds me of, a team, Blackburn Rovers, when we won the Premiership back in the 90s, where you didn't know where it was going to take you but you knew that there was a team who were absolutely on it, and everything felt like it was like you were going along together, and you knew that there was purpose at the end of this, and we won the Premiership. And I think the same's just happened in Liverpool with Klopp's leadership, and Liverpool, they brought the country along with them with a style of football and a smile on Mo Salah's face, and all of that. It just, there's a real analogy, and Red or Dead felt like that, and as I said, the early days of delivering housing at Hemingway Design felt like that we were changing things just enough, and this feels like that, and we've managed to get some of the biggest brands from around the world, from the super sustainable Patagonia to those who are on the route, MasterCard, Coca-Cola, down to loads and loads of small businesses who are a combination of wanting to learn more but are also super sustainable. And the lineup's fantastic. We do Act 1 on October the 8th, and then Act 2 in March. And I don't think I'm so energized, as you can probably tell, I'm really energized about the whole thing.
And so what's going to happen in Act 1?
We're going to look at business and the world through the lens of COVID. And we've got things like, we start off with a film called WTF Just Happened, and we're interviewing, down Zoom or down the likes of luminaries from all around the world, from politicians to world leaders to people on the front line of the NHS, and what. Basically making a film of what's happened. Then we discuss that, and throughout the day we look at the impact of globalization. We look at the impact of COVID on women, on women's work, working with Jude Kelly and Women of the World Festival. We work with Sport England on the impact of COVID on sport, and it goes. There's no section of life that we don't touch, and we've got big names and unheard of names to be discovered. It's live. It will go out in front of a studio audience from a studio in Liverpool. There's different channels. So think of watching telly. You can pick different channels depending on what your subject matter and what your penchant is. And then it carries on live from Canada, live from Australia, into the evening, and then it lives online. We really are doing things. It's very outcomes led. So we've got things like the solution. Well, every single session, we start off with this thing called a setup, where we set up the issue that we're talking about with the stats. We've got Ipsos Mori as a partner, looking at what the public think about this, but getting public opinion, putting it up on screen, showing bits of news footage, and then we've got like stellar panels of people and fantastic moderators like Krishnan Guru Murthy and Evan Davis, and I think we've got Asma Mamia now. We're talking to her this morning, so we've got great panelists who are used to dealing in, making sure that there are outcomes at the end of interviews. And then we've got the panel who, we don't introduce the panel. You just it's their name, rank and serial number only. No pontification about what they've done or their history. And then we have like 17 or 18 minutes of a debate. And then a klaxon goes off called the action klaxon. And then for the last 10 minutes, there has to be outcomes, there has to be pledges, and there has to be, when we return for Act 2 in March, what are you going to have tried to have achieved in those 5 months? And that'll be for every session. So there's nobody standing up there on doing like a TEDx, which for me is starting to sound a bit dated now, where you're talked without any questioning. You're in a discussion with people from a diverse viewpoints on it. You've got the best moderator in the business, and you have to, in the last 10 minutes, when that klaxon goes off, it's not like rugby where you can carry on to finish what the move that you're making. It's football, end, and you get then onto, and the extra time is where you make your pledges, and so I'm proud of all the way that it's been set up. The messaging behind it is exciting. I think the brand is strong, and it feels fresh.
And how much is this going to cost people?
Nothing. It's totally and utterly free. I think we'll ticket. October's totally and utterly free. You can donate to good causes in Liverpool. So if you can afford it, we urge you to donate, and that'll all be clear online. But March will be ticketed. Then it's a full city takeover of Liverpool. It's a come to Liverpool for the whole week, and the first week of March, and that will be a full-on festival. We're learning a lot from South by Southwest. We want it to be that kind of mixture of fun and seriousness, and
I think it's going to be amazing, and will help a lot of people. So we're really excited to be a part of it. So to end then, I know that you are a big sort of proponent of creativity and creative people. And I know you've sort of said that there should be more creative people in like public, in the public sector. How important is creativity in business?
Well, I genuinely believe that creativity belongs to everybody. There's no, you don't have to be taught creativity. You can go to college and learn elements of the creative industries. There are people within every business who are creative, and it's how you bring it out. And I think there should be, a director of, or a partner in, well, doesn't have to be a partner, but somebody who's on the board and somebody in the decision making of every business who thinks and talks about creativity and not just about bottom line. And I think it's starting to happen. the thing that we've got nowadays is proof that the creative industries and creativity generates GDP. It's the second biggest driver of the economy in the UK. It's the fastest growing export sector, or it was until COVID. It's a massive employer, and so, but it's been a long time for business to not treat it like a Cinderella subject and think that it was, it's what those people who aren't very bright at school do. Unfortunately, that has been prevalent for quite a long time in society. And it's still there to an extent.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing, Wayne. Thank you so much. I think we should probably do a part 2 at some point, because I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been amazing.